So I'm back with a new book that you've seen before. It's a flower. Um, yeah, with leaves. So let's see what this book, which was written in 1478. Well, after 1478, when Thomas More was born. So yeah, around the 15th century, 16th century. That's when this book was written. So this book is about the social civilizational forces. It was basically, it's showing you that communism is very old. It's a very old system. And it might go back to the days of King Arthur and the ladies of that time, who might have not been very pleased with the order, the masculine order, and the knights in shining armor and all that, which I learned from Paul Elam, was a great, interesting, history of the feminization of today. So let's just go back to a time when hopefully there were less, people would tolerate less than they do today in terms of intellectual corruption. So this is the introduction written by Mr. Clarence Miller. Okay. So here we are at the introduction of this old book. I don't know when the introduction was written. Let me check that. So this book came out in 2001. So it's a millennial. Another PMS rant. The circumstances under which Moore composed Utopia, as he recounts then in the opening of the book, gives us some clues about one of its central issues: public service versus contemplated withdrawal. So kind of like what I'm going through. I used to be public service, and now I'm doing contemplative withdrawal. So the circumstances under which this guy supposedly made this book gives us the clue that this is a central issue, he says. So Moore was a busy London lawyer in the service of Henry VIII on a trade commission, negotiating in the spring and early summer of 1515 in Brogues. So busy London lawyer and working on the trade commission. I don't even know what that is. Trade commission. It sounds like some kind of report that think tank makes. So they negotiate in the spring and summer of 1515. And in the midst of this activity came 3 months of leisure from late July to late October. The negotiations were interrupted because the Flemish ambassadors had to return to consult with their prince. So that was kind of like that scene in 300 where the negotiation happens between the Persian and uh, the group. Released from business and public service, Moore had time for thought and contemplation. He wrote what would become the second book of Utopia, a description of the island and its people, customs, and form of government. So he was released from business and public service, and therefore he could think again. Interesting. Admission right there by Mr. Miller. So this is the second book of Utopia, actually. So hopefully it's more powerful. It was probably more impactful on the world, I guess. No, for sure. So this is the second book of Utopia, right? But hopefully he'll connect the dots and we can continue. Or he'll give us a preview of a summary, of the previous one. So he becomes the second book of Utopia, a description of the island and its people, customs, and form of government. It's a sort of fantastic Lucianic travelogue. Another thing I don't understand, Lucianic. Lucianic. All right. After he returned, sounds like Messianic, but it's Lucianic. So it's a fantastic and Lucianic travelogue. So one of those adventure stories that I used to love reading when I was a kid. So he would become the second book of Utopia. He wrote the second book of Utopia after the thought and contemplation. And now he gives a description of the island and its people, customs, and form of government. A sort of fantastic travelogue. But after he came home, he wrote the first book, a semi-Platonic dialogue framework concerning the question of whether it is useful to serve as the counselor of a prince. Not king, but prince. The first book, in other words, argues about the alternatives of engagement or retreat. So this is what the first book was about, the alternatives. So I guess it's a very philosophical book. The first book argues about the alternatives of engagement or retreat. So fight or flight, they're saying, be or not to be. That's the first book. The second book, you've already made up your mind about what he's saying, about his utopia. So he'll, well, anyway, unlike Platonic dialogues, which reach solutions, or even Ciceronian dialogues, which are more open-ended but clearly suggest the superiority of one outlook. Kind of like some of these liberal TV shows, news dialogues. Actually, I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway, the first book of Utopia, let's find more about that, comes to no conclusion. It does not take long for the reader to see that Hythlode, the peddler of nonsense, the one Nutraj dances on, contradicts his position by telling the story of his sojourn in the court of Cardinal Morton. So he tells the story of the journey to the court of CM, who listens to H's advice about punishing thieves and suggests that it might be tried in a modified form. So what is that saying? I guess there's a legal discussion going on in this first book. So he doesn't defeat Moore in the argument. Wow. So Moore is in the first book too. Well, I guess there's no conclusion. Just like life, I guess, in politics. So he does not defeat Moore. H does not defeat Moore in the argument about the necessity of communism. He simply evades it by insisting that Moore would agree with him. If he had seen how communism had transformed the good place, UTopia. So that's another interesting thing. I mean, I guess Moore is Shiva, right? And H is, what was the other one? And the demon. Oh, I forgot the demon's name, but nor does he defeat Moore in the argument about the necessity of communism. He simply evades it by insisting that Moore would agree with him if he had seen how communism had transformed the good place, UTopia. But unfortunately, the good place is also no place. So I guess H is a homeless bum, just like Jesus. No place. And not everything about the good place is good. All right. So now he's using an argument to say that not everything about this no place is really, which he calls a good place, is good. Apart from the policies on euthanasia and divorce, which might be tolerated in a non-Christian society, it practices capital punishment with a harshness not far from what H condemns in Book 1. So he's saying euthanasia and divorce will work, but capital punishment won't work in this future communist society. So it seems, based on the historical and philosophical and power politics, I guess, going on in the minds of men. So I guess they had too many memories of, or I guess it was too close to a time when, or they saw the evils of, what is it called, vengeance and so forth. Revenge, and just delighting in like narcissistic and thoughtless society. So he's saying the capital punishment is bad, and that's why H is wrong. Its military and especially its colonial policies also leave much to be desired. All right, colonial policies. So yeah, they're not as savage, or that's not the right word, but they're not as brutal as he would like. That's weird. Right here he says capital punishment is wrong, and here he says H is bad because he wants capital punishment of a brutal sort. not just a nice little hanging and lethal injection and so forth. At the end of book 2, we are left with H's passionate condemnation of the outrageous social injustices of European society. But we are not really any closer to believing that they could be cured by communism, partly because we know that it has never been introduced in society as a whole and never could be. And we are never told how it should. So yeah, now he's talking about this book, that we're left with his passionate condemnation of the outrageous social injustices of European society, right? So Europeans are still agreeing that they have a lot of social injustices, even back then. And they're not really any closer to believing that they could be cured by communism. Because we know that it has never been introduced in society as a whole and never could be. And we're never told how it was introduced or sustained in Utopia. So there's confusion in his argument, he's claiming, at the second book. Wow, man. Really going at him. Even if we thought it might work in Western nations, would we want to live in such a faceless and regimented society? Oh, wow. So it's to be or not to be. That's what we find out in these days, huh? Do we want to live or do we want to not live in a faceless and regimented society? The citizens sometimes seem like robots. The houses, even the cities, seem almost interchangeable. So the houses in the cities seem almost interchangeable. Wow. So just like the hustle and bustle of the city, the same in the house. Apart from Utopus, not Utopia, but Utopus. I guess he's a Zeus of the book. So apart from Utopus, we never learned the name of a single utopian. So they're all nameless. And they all have, they have only a king that's important. So it's a monarchical system that H is talking about. Not the anarchy that's going on. Did H never have any special friends there? One could say that he's not interested in autobiography, but only in the utopian's economic, social, and political institutions. But should... Alright, so... I guess he's still arguing his case. The paragraph is a long one. One could say that he's not interested in autobiography, but only in the utopian's economic, social, and political institutions. But should children simply be taken from their parents and moved to a different family? There goes the whole demasculinization of boys right there. It's because people believe that it was cruel to remove children from the comforts of the domicile living at a age that's too young. Should whole populations be shifted back and forth to the continental colonies to provide demographic stability? Wow, they're even talking about the wall. So yeah, I mean, like, should we be nomadic, going back and forth to all the colonies and provide demographic stability, to provide demographic stability, because the population needs to be stable. That's interesting. So they got a little population control up in this biatch too. Yeah, speaking of population control, when I was in the hospital, it was like, damn, man, everything was so unhealthy according to what the doctors themselves, at least used to say a decade ago when I paid attention, or half a decade ago, I'm sorry. Well, was it half a decade ago? Yeah, like a decade ago, when I got out of college with my bio degree. That's when I figured out that it's a very cruel world out there, and I don't want to be a part of it. Such facts and questions make us realize that More's utopia does not fit the ordinary meaning of the word as it comes down in modern languages, where it signifies an unreservedly good place. All right, and now I don't want to get into spellings and shoot, because I've been doing way too much of that English business. I gotta do more Hindi raps, or Kashmiri. That's what I really want to do. But anyway, I'm out. Peace.